5, 4. All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to host Nick Vanderberg, co-founder and CEO of Fologram, and Jahn, CCO of Fologram. Fologram is a product where I have been following it for a while, and it's amazing development, and a lot of my colleagues share their research projects and the projects we have done Fologram. I'm very excited to host you guys, and thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah. So first, I'll like to go ahead with Nick. Can you share us highlights from your career till date?
Highlights of the career till today. Sure. Sorry, in terms of like highlights just around with Fologram, or sort of more like the journey of how we've ended up here?
Yeah, your professional journey.
Sure. Yeah, so I come from not a traditional digital architecture background. I actually did economics at uni and went into a banking career of all things. But as I was going through that, it's always been in my mind that I was super fascinated around building products and building companies. So I always knew I wanted to go off and basically start something. And so the first sort of startup I was involved in is a company called Simply Wall Street, which is in the finance field. It's sort of like a stock research tool. And so yeah, had a lot of fun sort of co-founding that with a friend, and that's sort of continued to grow. And then after I sort of was looking at sort of stepping back from day to day, involved in Simply Wall Street, and was sort of looking at, I guess, other opportunities of whatever sort of I'd very much call the bug of the startup world of really enjoying building things that people are using. So yeah, sort of looking around, and that's luckily or coincidentally, Gwyllim I've known for many years. We grew up in the same country town in a place in Australia. And so yeah, Gwyllim was sort of letting me know things that he was up to and what he's playing around with. And yeah, basically the start of what Fologram was basically one of his projects. So sounded like a pretty fun thing to get involved in, and so that's what I did.
Oh, that's so interesting. And was the conversation happened over a beer or a coffee about the idea of Fologram?
Well, in terms of Gwyllim, Gwyllim can obviously go into more detail, but Gwyllim's always worked on a lot of sort of interest projects around the digital fabrication and digital architecture space. So he's always building 3D printers and doing different sort of things with generative design. And in effect, I guess over a course of a couple of years, when he was when working at the university, he was sort of always pitching like, these are sort of interesting ideas I'm working on, like what, trying to see what would be potentially be turned into a business sort of thing. So it was sort of like a longer term process, and a lot of them were always very interesting, but not necessarily looked like they had immediate commercial application. And I'd say when he started sort of pitching what Fologram is involved in around the use of AR in fabrication and construction, that definitely, out of all the ideas and projects involved, it seemed that it was closest to be able to be something that could be commercialized, sort of thing. And so
yeah, I mean, I remember pitching. It wasn't over a coffee or a beer, Nick. I remember the pitch for Fologram pretty clearly. Cam's our CTO, the third co-founder of Fologram. We've done the use of the HoloLens for construction. And Microsoft got really excited by it. And so we came back to our hotel room and we were preparing a pitch deck for the next day. And it was about 3 a.m. in the morning. And Cam and I couldn't sleep. We were so excited. We thought, all right, we've got to turn this into a company. There's no way that two academics can do this. We need somebody with some business chops. And so we pretty much called you up, I think, Nick, in the middle of the night to convince you to sign on. And I think Nick was excited that Microsoft was interested. And so that's what got him on board.
Yeah. You might have been slightly inebriated on that call, I think.
Oh my God, I didn't know this part. This is super, super cool. I'm just turning off the video because of the bandwidth. But so Gul, can you describe your professional journey? Like, what are some highlights?
Yeah, I think Nick's given a very brief summary of it. I mean, so unlike Nick, I do come from a design background. Studied architecture at RMIT in Melbourne, and after finishing the degree, went and worked for some practices that were doing very, I guess, innovative work. So at Lab Architects in Melbourne, they did Federation Square, and at MVS Architects, who were doing a whole lot of work with computational design and digital fabrication. And Melbourne's a pretty interesting city to be a sort of a graduate architect in, just because there's so many crazy buildings that get built here. There seems to be a real sort of willingness to take risks with architecture in this city. But I found that working in practice was just was taking up all of my time and wasn't letting me do as much experimentation as I wanted to do. You know, I wanted to continue working with robots and continue developing a sort of a skill set in programming, and that was difficult to do in an architecture office. And so for about a decade, I've been teaching and researching and always looking for projects that would have some capacity to have impact outside of the university. So trying to essentially develop tools for the building industry that would expand the sort of limits of what we're capable of constructing. That's what I've always been excited by and motivated by and interested in. And so, as Nick mentioned, that involved everything from kind of looking at robotic fabrication, at 3D printing, at sort of machine learning and computer vision. I did a little bit of work with, sort of like microprocessors and sensing and things like that. And always to sort of find ways to build the sorts of complex things that we were able to draw with modeling software, but that were otherwise very, very difficult to give to a conventional builder and ask them to go build it. And so when we got our hands on the HoloLens in 2016, I mean, Cam and I knew immediately that was going to be a sort of transformative technology because it was accessible. It let you view these sorts of wild digital models that we were creating in the computer and then just fabricate them with the skill sets that you already had available. And so, as in like your own intuition and your own craft skill. And so in terms of my career path, I think once we figured out that there was this huge opportunity with the HoloLens and nobody else seemed to be tapping into it really, like using augmented reality for construction, even though that idea has been around for a long time, it hadn't actually been practically demonstrated really. We just thought, well, let's go all in on this. And so from sort of early 2017, we've just exclusively been focused on augmented reality.
Oh, I see. Like that's amazing. And like I'm very curious to know, like, what was the challenges and from idea to prototype stage, because it's a lot of things you guys had to figure out, like a right product market fit, the technical aspect. Like, can you share those aspects?
Yeah. So the idea to build from holographic models that you view in augmented reality taking that idea and getting to a prototype phase where you have a software application that lets you, view your model and locate it in space in a reliable, repeatable way, and then use that as a sort of a virtual template to construct from. That initial phase only took a couple of days, and that initial prototype was developed by Cam, our CTO. So technically, like that, the sort of the MVP for the idea is pretty straightforward and simple, but then the translation from the MVP to something that can be used by the sorts of users that we had in mind for Fologram, that's years of work. And so when I say the users that we had in mind, I think the people who have the most exciting kind of use cases for augmented reality are creatives and makers who perhaps aren't the most digitally literate people necessarily. Like I think say a steel fabricator who makes sculptures is a perfect end user for Fologram and the HoloLens, and they might use Rhino a little bit, but they probably don't know how to code. And so what we've spent a few years doing is developing that prototype to the point where it's so simple to get any kind of 3D content onto the HoloLens so you can view it sort of reliably and interact with it in some simple ways, so that it facilitates like more experimentation, more ambitious making, things like that. I think Nick probably can speak to that challenge of learning from how users actually use the HoloLens pretty, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it's I guess off that, there's sort of people think they know what they want to see on a HoloLens, and then the reality is actually quite different. So what people think they want to see is going to be something like in Minority Report, that movie with Tom Cruise sliding screens around and pressing buttons and everything like that. That is the worst possible way to use AR, because you get information overload. Like, what piece of information you're supposed to be looking at? Like, the best way to use AR is like you're trying to show a very specific, relevant piece of information in situ thing. And that's right down to the point of, you don't want to see the 10 pieces of information either side of it. You just want to see that exact piece of information that you need for that moment, and then you can move on to the next one. And so a lot of what it's almost like less is more. A lot what we spent years with working with people and seeing how, like, how does the bricklayer use it, how does that guy in the factory use it, how does a architect in design office use it, sort of thing. And we've really tried to strip it so much down that you can just see the barest piece of information, but that information is super valuable. So if you're on a machine bending a piece of steel, you just need to see, all right, where does the bend piece need to be, and where is the endpoint need to be? I don't need to see the entire see the entire beam, because that's just making it confusing, because you're trying to work out what's real in the physical world, what's the digital overlay. So if you just show those two key pieces of information, that's going to be super productive, and that means you can use it all day rather than getting tired out, sort of thing, because you're seeing too much stuff. So education is always a big part of the challenge, where it's trying to get people to understand how to use the tech and how to use it, that you can use it basically for all day, because that's the if needed.
I see. And for your first few customers, like, what was the onboarding experience? Like, what were the steps you took so that they had a better product experience?
So the first basically was there was a lot of hand holding, I say, with the first clients as we were understanding that point. And so that really usually actually involved us sort of on site, sort of thing. So the first client of Fologram was a university. And so we basically went down there and ran some workshops to sort of like show, the potential of the technology across different departments. And this is why we always love and running workshops, sort of thing, because even I'd say longer than a lot of people expect us to keep doing it, because it's such a valuable, intense way to get a lot of feedback all at once. I'd say the early stages was always mostly us being on site with the client and seeing how they're using it. But now obviously we've moved more to a case of we've picked up a lot of those things, and so now the things we can do through documentation, videos and onboarding, etc., that I guess we've now built up a playbook of what's best practice, and that's something that we are able to deploy remotely now, which is based in Australia was always the most of our clients live overseas sort of thing. So it's sort of it was always pretty key that we know we can't rock up in every single factory or every university or office. So it's sort of like, how is this like a scalable piece of tech that we can roll out to multiple people?
I see. And like, what was the whole the bottleneck of this whole product development?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think to maybe a further thing to add is, I think one of the things that made the initial development of Fologram relatively easy is we were building products for ourselves. So Fologram, before we got our first client, we built the MVP and kept refining the software in order for Cam and I to create prototypes with students at university. And when you're building a tool for yourself, like if you're the end user of the tool, you have a pretty intimate knowledge of how you want that tool to work and exactly what problem that tool is trying to solve. And it's really the dream as a product developer. If you are the end user, then it's much easier to design a product. I think the product development bottleneck came perhaps as we the sort of the core issue I think we found was that we wanted to develop a platform. We thought AR is going to be useful for everything. It's going to be useful for construction. It's going to be useful for prototyping. It's going to be useful for visualization. You could even use Fologram and Grasshopper to make any sort of interactive AR app. I mean, we made like darts games with Fologram. We made these little experimental videos where you can control sort of like virtual robots and make clay modeling applications. And really there was just this wealth of possibility. We can do anything. And the bottleneck we found is that if you try to build a software platform that supports so many different use cases, you end up kind of diluting the value for everybody. And as we've kind of gone on with product development, we've chosen to focus more and more, I think, on specifically using AR for fabrication, for hands-on construction. And that then I think enables us to build a tool which is much more useful for that specific sort of niche, and then eliminates that. I think it's not so much like a development bottleneck as a sort of just a product design bottleneck, where you want to make sure that the product you're building is as valuable as possible for the people who are using it. And so in our case, that's mostly fabricators.
I see. And is there anything you wish you would have done differently in either technically or business aspect?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think we've been running Fologram for almost, well, actually for sort of four years now as a company, and almost 5 years as developers. And over that time, the technology has progressed quite a bit. So for instance, Facebook's released or bought Oculus and has released the Quest 1 and the Quest 2 in that time. The HoloLens 2 has come out. Like WebXR has gotten significantly better in that time. Google and Apple have released ARKit, ARCore, AR development frameworks that are also increasingly running on the web. There's so many exciting technologies that are emerging that I think, I mean, I sort of, it's not a regret in terms of I wish we'd run the business differently, but it's a regret creatively that we weren't able to explore as many of these things as perhaps I'd wanted to. So for instance, I mean, last year with the pandemic, we realized that everybody would be working increasingly online, and that would include sort of students who would be learning online, and we were being asked to sit in on design crits and things like that. And it was just hours and hours and hours of people sharing PDFs over Zoom like this, and it was getting really tedious and boring, and we sort of thought, well, we've got maybe a little bit of free time on our hands. Perhaps we can build a better platform for doing design presentations online, and we ended up playing around with a bunch of, like with 3JS and things like that for building 3D applications on the web. We made a platform called @.studio where you could, publish a 3D model and build a presentation within a 3D virtual environment so that it was sort of spatial and shared and much more engaging than a PDF. And that was really exciting and fun. But, it's just also a big distraction from our core focus, which is on using AR for fabrication. And so I think, if there's like I don't think we would have done anything differently, because exploring these different sort of technologies is always really engaging, but it's just a sort of a regret that I don't have multiple lives so that we could do multiple companies in all of these spaces. I just think there's so many opportunities and so much exciting stuff going on.
I see. Nick, do you have anything to add?
No, I think I think we'll hit the nail on the head. Like, I mean, myself, Gwyllim, Cam, we all, slightly different backgrounds. We love building things, like we love exploring things. Like that's the exciting thing. But and so like there's almost like a business regret where we're like, oh, there's like, there's 5 potential different startups that we could go pivot and do, sort of thing, and they could be like great opportunities. But it is a case of so much of this the tech game is around focus and perseverance, sort of thing. And so it's sort of I'm like Will. It's the case of not regrets, but it's almost a case of like, oh, I wish everything could move faster so you could like run through one journey and then and then jump onto the next. But that's not quite how the real world not how the real world works.
I see. And like, I'm very curious to know your thoughts, like coming from like doing startups from non-AC and coming to AC. What are the things you had like expected that this should work, but it didn't work out well, or the industry is a bit complicated than you thought?
Yeah, fantastic question. Yeah, it's certainly been super. It's certainly been a pretty interesting and educational experience for me over the years. That now obviously we've been to so many conferences and workshops and with our clients sort of around the world, that certainly understand it a lot better than I did when I first came in. I think the one thing I was but just going back to one of the points also Will mentioned, where it's sort of like the original idea of Fologram, how we gave this sort of like, basically this fantastic toolkit, this fantastic prototyping toolkit where you could do anything you want. And I guess there was sort of a thought process that, we're super excited around the tech, and we thought everyone within the industry would be super excited around the tech. And so they would, as soon as they had the chance to be able to do something, such as using Fologram, then they'd go off and do it. I'd say the one thing that we've found interesting is like people are interested in it, but like they have the realities of business and time as well, whether that's like a commercial client or a university. There's other priorities they've got, and they can't necessarily pick something up and just completely run with it. Hey, it's probably comes back to that exact same point that we said. There's like 5 different things that are super exciting, and we want to do them all. And we're chatting with these people, and they have that same issue that they've got. They're like, oh, this AR stuff's really interesting, but then there's something over here that's really interesting. It's like, how do I stretch myself out and do all of them? So I'd say there was probably a little bit of expectation that some people might have picked up and run with the tech more, that we thought the only bottleneck was necessarily the actual technical issue of getting models on the headset that Fologram solves, but the reality is that not always. They have to deal with everything else, and so sometimes we need to provide more leadership, I guess, and demonstrate what is possible with the tech as a sort of flag bearer to show everyone else. So when they're dealing with all these competing priorities, they see, oh well, it's a surefire bet because here is something we can point to. Here's like a case study or example or a project that demonstrates that it actually works, sort of thing. And so yeah, I'd say for me personally, that was the yeah, that was just like an interesting thing. But you know, that's you know, we adapted to that, and you know, basically certainly got our hands have been getting our hands dirty, and it's fun going off and doing projects and showing stuff that can work. But yeah, we probably have to dive in a bit deeper than I was expecting when we first started up.
I see. And I must admit, like, doing an AEC startup is very challenging. So how did you guys worked with the business side of it, figuring out the right financial model that would work?
Yeah, it's an ever evolving that's an ever evolving question. Hey, it doesn't necessarily, you don't just solve it and then it's all done. You have to keep solving on a continuous basis. I think I mean the tidbit I like is like sell really early. Sell, like, don't and this is what we did. Like, it wasn't a case of like, oh, we're gonna like prototype and chat with people and spend 2 years building something, sort of thing. Like, you know, once we started the company, our first paying client through the door, like obviously we had built the prototype of the software and everything like that, but there is nothing when you have people giving you cash, that's a lot different than people saying, oh yes, I'd love to use that software and I definitely would pay for it. But then when you actually have to get them to hand over their credit card, there's a big difference, hey? And so we got their credit cards up pretty early. And so that helped refine, like, in terms of where we're having success, where should we be focusing our product roadmap and development, because obviously, and this is basically what's led to this case of like Will mentioned, like where we sort of now come to this, you know, we spend a lot of time and focus around use of fabrication, because basically, you know, to be perfectly frank, that's where also the money is, where the people that were getting the most use out of the app on a consistent basis, sort of thing, it's within these areas where it's like there's a lower barrier that, you know, you can convince going into a factory or what have you, a fabrication setup. You're like, you know, what's your bottleneck in your business? It's like, oh, well, this particular area here where we can't understand the plans, it takes a long time. It's like, well, we can solve that issue now. And so, yeah, sorry, rambled a bit, but yeah, basically the key thing I was like, charge really early and then let that help develop the way you go.
I see. And like, doing a startup is always like, I have seen at the beginning stage, one take multiple roles like finance, accounting, marketing. So I'd like to know from both of you, first with Gwyllim, like, how does a day in your life look like?
Every day is unfortunately very different in our lives. That's what makes it really exciting, though. It's unfortunate because you have to be the kind of person that can constantly adapt, and so that's stressful, and you're always taking risks. But it's exciting because you're always learning new things and working with different people. So a day in a life of Fologram, I mean, it's in 2019, so before the pandemic. Something that Nick mentioned before is that we have to do a lot of eating our own dog food in terms of using our software to demonstrate what it's good for, what problems that it solves. And so we would be typically, you know, running multiple design projects where either we were the designers of the project. In the case of the pavilion that we did in Tallinn, where a day might involve you know, running workshops or doing prototyping in our studio to figure out how to use the HoloLens to steam bend timber, something which nobody had ever done before, because we were on the hook to deliver a pavilion in 6 months that we had no idea at all how to build. And that's not something that a software company normally does. That's just not at all an activity that software companies normally do, like material research and things like that. But we would be doing it because we understood that it was one of the things that's so exciting about AR is that, and about working with Fologram, is you can take these, say, older notions of craft and older techniques for making things that are maybe, you know, gradually being replaced by completely automated mass manufacturing, and bring them back to life by using them in combination with sort of digital design techniques, which is what that pavilion was all about. We thought there was like a huge opportunity there, and we wanted to showcase it because it was something that we were sort of just intrinsically motivated by, but also because there's a business opportunity there. We thought, well, hey, let's demonstrate this, and then that will lead to other people who will extend that kind of exploration of AR, which is what we've seen happening. But then at the same time, maybe we do consulting work, which, you know, tech startups don't like doing consulting because you get paid for your time. That's not a great business model. But again, we would do that because what we're really interested in is the sort of the value of observing industry using AR. And so, I mean, Nick can speak about it if you're interested in it, but we've done a lot of work with bricklayers on site doing complex masonry projects using the HoloLens. And for those projects to actually happen in real construction sites, they don't just happen out of thin air. There needs to be some support there to reduce the risk for those contractors in working with the new technology, and then also achieve some of the gains, like a reduction in construction time or a reduction in the risk of sort of mucking up a pretty complex job from working from insufficient drawings and, you know, all of the usual problems that you run into. And then, of course, so those are the weird things that you do. And then, of course, there's marketing activities. So, you know, I think Fologram, something's always been quite important to us is building a sort of a community of designers and creatives who do really, really exciting work, and showcasing that work and trying to partner with those people and help them do more ambitious, amazing work. And so there's sort of, you know, we haven't done much since the pandemic hit, but things like Instagram and Vimeo and sort of telling the stories of these projects has been really important in a daily activity. And then there's obviously software development, which since the pandemic we've focused on a lot more. So that's been it's unfortunate to be doing less building just because you can't when you're stuck in your bedroom. But I think on the flip side, that's led us, like in the last 2 years, we've made huge improvements to the software platform, and we've sort of you know, been working on some really exciting new tech stacks and some exciting new applications which have only really recently been released, and that's because our core team can spend more time on development, which has been great.
What about you, Nick?
Yep. So I guess in terms of how we have our own sort of domain level expertise sort of thing, and as Gwil sort of mentioned a lot around the design and product for himself. Cam, our CTO, is obviously around development, and myself is more around sort of the business and finance and sales aspect, I guess, and sort of client interactions where I spend a lot of time. But there is like in a start, there's always a lot of overlap, and there sort of needs to be as well, where in terms of needing those different levels of expertise is pretty critical sort of thing. So yeah, in terms of day to day, like so one, obviously the stuff around finance. So obviously we've got a lot of clients around the world, so there's a lot of things around the foreign currency and billing things around the world, there's a bit of complexity there. Things around in terms of work we're doing with R&D, and you know the government's being interested in that, and you know there's sometimes being tax rebates, etc. available, and then a lot around the sales aspects sort of thing. So either existing clients in terms of helping them out, or basically trying to bring in more clients through the door. But I think what's sort of of fun around sort of when you're sort of these early stage startups and doing interesting things like us. It's like you getting the hands dirty. So whether that's we certainly don't just sit behind computer screens. So like Gwyllim mentioned, when we're sort of more involved hands-on with projects. So things like the brick project we're involved, like, you know, we're on site, like helping the client sort of like, you know, in the high vis going around, and they're like on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, there was a lot of, we used to do a lot of travel as well with conferences and presentations and running workshops. So that took up a large portion of time, and which, you know, might be coming a bit back next year sort of thing, which would be good because there's some people we've only chatted on Zoom for the last few years. So it'd be nice to catch back up in person. But yeah, you need to, yeah, not just in AEC, any startup, you need to be very happy to be wearing multiple hats that are always swapping as well, and just being able to be super flexible to adapt, because yeah, no 2 days are the same, and they can be quite dramatically different. So yeah, it's not for everyone, but if you sort of thrive on that, I don't know, controlled chaos, it's very rewarding.
I see. So how do you guys manage work-life balance?
There's just then silence from look, I think to be honest, I think we're better than we used to be. And I'd say there's just an element as one gets older as well, sort of thing, that you want to try and handle that. So I'd say the one thing, like, we don't, you know, there's no, I mean, if needed, yes, but like there's a general concept, you know, we're not sitting in the office at 10, 11 p.m. at night anymore. It's like more in terms of trying to do like a more reasonable hour set, because that you're just more productive as well, sort of thing. Like, I think it's a bit ridiculous, these people that, you know, when you're doing like a lot of very mentally challenging and draining work, that, to be honest, a lot of stuff what we do is like, you know, if you're sitting in the office for 14, 16 hours, like, you know, that's pretty stupid way of working, I think. So yeah, one, we try and do, try and make sure the hours aren't too far out, and try not to get into too many Slack conversations, discussing stuff at work after hours. I mean, obviously it does happen. I don't know.
I think
I'm sort of
maybe
yeah.
in terms of how we run the company, I think something we do quite differently to other companies is, you know, we've been working remotely for a little while now, well, for almost sort of 2 years, and we're pretty good at independently managing projects and workloads. So we manage to keep things like meetings to a minimum. And so when we are catching up with one another on Zoom or catching up with clients, that's typically sort of more informal discussion, like you'd maybe have sort of when you go out for lunch or something like that, and that helps work be more enjoyable, even though you're not together. And then when we are working together, I think you know, we're generally in terms of a work-life balance, I think we tend to optimize, or like we're very focused on building software tools that help people do exciting things. And for us, that's a sort of an intrinsic motivation. So it's very rewarding to see clients and to go and help clients build things like that. That's like a fun, enjoyable activity that doesn't necessarily feel like work. But personally, I think I'm absolutely terrible at work-life balance. I'm always doing far too many things. Whether they're with Fologram or academically, or just, you know, having too many kids at once, or whatever it might be.
I see. It's difficult. I'm curious to know, like, is Fologram bootstrapped?
Yes. So basically, as I mentioned, the advice earlier, like charge early, that's what we did. And so that's basically our clients have in effect funded the development sort of thing. So for us, we've never gone out and tried to raise any money. Maybe one day we will, but mostly there's a lot of driver around that, because as sort of Gwyll was mentioning, like, we're not a traditional software company. Like, we do a lot of things pretty weirdly, pretty bizarrely. On paper, it's like, well, what are you actually doing? There's like a bit of design in there, there's a bit of consulting, there's like software as a service. And mostly, I guess why we're doing that is because, this has been like our sort of R&D. Like, we sort of want to answer all these questions. And so as things become more and more refined, that we can focus in, and we haven't had to deal with any outside pressure in terms of people that be like, well, hang on, you're gonna go build a pavilion in the middle of Eastern Europe sort of thing for months on end. Like, that makes no sense on like software paper, but like in terms of our business, it made a huge amount of sense. And so and we knew that because we're sort of like on the front lines and dealing with it. So yeah, we've been lucky enough to basically just be positive geared from nearly day one, and that's let us do what we want to do, which is also pretty satisfying.
I think that client funded development is such a good line as well for us. I think it means that like, by bootstrapping, it forces us to be very efficient, I think, with how we fund the development. So when we go talk to a client, you're able to say, look, you're paying for this software subscription, and almost 100% of the funds from that subscription go towards improving the software. Like, it's not going towards like an admin team and a marketing team and like Google AdWords and all of this other stuff, which actually adds no value whatsoever for the client. So in addition to the thing that Nick mentioned, like, we're super proud of bootstrapping Fologram and not having external pressure, which lets us be really creative with how we choose to run the company.
That's amazing. And like, my next question is, what is one thing that frustrates you the most about the industry, or an area of improvement?
Ooh. One thing. Look, I can go first. I think this is probably almost a bugbear of any startup in nearly any industry. The construction is an incredibly risk adverse industry, and there's a lot of studies out there. We can see it's like literally one of the least innovative industries in the world, and so because it's incredibly risk adverse, and they're dealing with extremely risky projects. When obviously you're building like $1 billion office tower, you don't, if you have a way that that it's always been done, and so you're like, so the risk on that is really low. Like, trying to do something a little bit crazy, like start using AR to set out a different process, for example, rather than doing the traditional way, that's always like that's an extra challenge for us, because people are like, we need to find the ambassadors and people that are a bit crazy enough that are willing to give these sort of initial pilot programs a go to prove that it works. So yeah, I'd love if the construction industry was a bit more innovative and a bit more risk taking. But the realities are, I can understand why. I can very much understand why they're not. It just obviously makes our job a little bit more difficult.
That's why we love design build companies as well, because I think then there's more of a willingness to engage with new construction techniques, because as a design build firm, you can reap those benefits a lot quicker. I think you're using AR on both the design side and on the construction side on site, and it's easier to drive efficiencies when you're in control of both of those things. So yeah, traditional construction, unfortunately, even though there's so many low-hanging fruit for AR out there where it's just gonna reduce mistakes and make life so much easier, the sort of the challenges to getting a headset on a guy on site, they can be pretty frustrating.
I see. And if you have like unlimited time and resources, what is one problem you'd like to solve?
um, if we had unlimited time and unlimited resources, there's quite a few problems I'd like to solve. Yeah, everything from like hardware, if you can make like AR models appear reliably with sub-millimeter precision, that would I think eliminate a lot of risks to working with them for a lot of people. If you could make the form factor of the hardware much smaller, so that people could wear these all day like glasses, that would also reduce barriers to use, which is what some of the biggest companies in the world are throwing almost unlimited resources at. They're trying to make the form factor of AR glasses as small as possible so that they can deliver content, or well, harness your attention for as long as possible. So we're not so interested in attention harnessing, obviously, but just in reducing like friction. So if you've already got the AR glasses on your head, then suddenly what's going to happen is everybody's going to want to work from mixed reality models for everything they do on construction sites. No one's going to want to pull out a pad of drawings or a 2D screen to try and look at the 3D building that they're making. Like, that's just going to seem like the Stone Age. But it requires that complete elimination of friction for the end user. So it seems strange, I think, to say I'd spend unlimited resources to save maybe like the 20 seconds of time it takes to put a HoloLens on and look at something. But those 20 seconds are what's preventing this from being ubiquitous. And I think in like a couple of years, it's probably somebody else with far more, who actually has unlimited time and resources will solve that problem.
The absolutely ditto to what Gwyll said. That the one little project, this is, I don't know, I mean, it's a relevant one little fun project that would always be good to do is integrating a AR headset with a welding helmet. So we do a lot of stuff with metal fabrication, and so obviously at the moment there is definitely some hardware fun you could have where you're actually integrating and we've had a lot of people request this in the matter. They're like, can you get the headset in the welding thing? And basically that would just be a fun little side project, to be honest. So if you had unlimited resources, you could indulge in some of these passions of doing things that maybe don't make business sense, but are just fun creatively. And yeah, I think making a AR integrated welding headset would be a lot of fun, and the end result would be a pretty valuable product for a lot of people. But like I say, that's literally like another startup idea. So, but that's what that'd be one little thing I'd like to have fun with.
I see. What are your thoughts on Metaverse?
Sorry, that was cut off for me. What our thoughts on what? Sorry.
Thoughts on Metaverse?
Gwyll, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's a good segue from this sort of the discussion that we were just having around unlimited time and resources, because it seems like most of the sort of, the largest technology companies in the world are pivoting towards building virtual environments as like a core sort of value proposition for their end users, like virtual spaces for work, virtual spaces for play, virtual spaces for learning, virtual spaces for trying on clothes and retail, virtual spaces for just everything, and so I think clearly there is a sort of a rush at the moment to staking a claim over that territory of being the virtual space for each one of those activities. I guess my thoughts on it are like there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. I think it's really exciting. The idea's been around for ages. It's suddenly recently become kind of like acceptable to say that you're building the metaverse when the technology for it isn't necessarily suddenly any more or less like real. um, I think, I mean, it's something
Mhm.
personally that fascinates me as well. I think when we were building this platform that I mentioned earlier at Studio, which was really like an internal sort of development experiment where we were playing around with some new tech, web-based tech. But the ideas behind that of creating like online collaborative spaces which are more engaging than just 2D screen shares, like now that would be called like a metaverse app, right? But when we made it, we were
Mhm.
just more interested in the utility of those sorts of spaces, like what it's actually for. um, and I think maybe like there's the distinction between those two things has become a little bit lost. Like
Mhm.
I think we should start with, well, what is the online virtual space for and what's the utility that it offers, rather than starting with, hey, it's this thing, but in the metaverse, and now suddenly it's valuable. Because we found that with that studio, it's sort of, the sort of at studio is not so different to Fologram necessarily. You're viewing models in a browser rather than on a headset, and it's collaborative in the same way that Fologram is. You can share those experiences with multiple other people, and so maybe Fologram is also like a metaverse app. It's just, I think the distinction is kind of meaningless. We've never branded anything as being part of the metaverse. But clearly, like, it's a big opportunity, and there's lots of territory that's going to get claimed, and it's going to impact. I think if like, increasingly our lives are going to take place within virtual spaces, and mixed reality will be the underlying core technology that enables that to happen, and that's obviously super exciting as a co-founder of a mixed reality startup. So yeah.
That's all.
What are your thoughts on the metaverse, Mayo?
Uh,
Because you've had other people presumably come on your show and discuss this. What are your thoughts?
the metaverse with blockchain interesting. So like there are like existed before, but like if you have assets metaverses, you can't transfer assets in other verses. But with blockchain, you could have that token and integration and have more incentives for people to hop into the members.
I think you split up a little bit, but I think the gist there was so blockchain as an underlying technology enables the sort of the connection of these multiple different spaces. Is that right?
Yeah, like the interoperability of metaverse was a big challenge, and I think blockchain makes it more interesting. Like solves the problem. Uh, m- my next question is like, what does Fologram look like in 2025?
Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of, I guess what we're sort of focusing on is just more use and more use cases within using the tech in AR. So, sorry, in fabrication. So, a lot of the projects that sort of we're involved in at the moment is where sort of like a lot of factory fabrication. So things like making like blue laminated beams, sort of large scale metal fabrication, sort of construction set out, etc. So I guess for us, we just sort of love the idea of seeing it more ubiquitous sort of thing across, where it's like integrated with a lot more workflows within these factory settings, that it's just simply another tool that they use. So, you know, they might have their hammer, they've got their welder, they've got their pencil and their ruler, and then they also have a headset sitting there running one of Fologram's products. And that's just, you know, they don't think anything of it. It's just like pick up and away you go sort of thing. So yeah, definitely keen seeing just greater use of that sort of thing. Because I mean, 2025 is going to come around pretty quick.
I see. And based on your experience, what is your piece of advice for people who are planning to start a mixed reality startup in AEC?
I mean, Gwyl's probably got some idea in this as well. I mean, I'd say one, just start it, do it. Like, I mean, the actual the quickest thing of wanting to like actually start building things, start testing things, start talking with real users, and yes, try and start charging as soon as you can. Because, as I sort of mentioned before, that is a great litmus test of if you're on the right track or not, if anyone's going to give you any money. So and yeah, and iterate a lot.
Mixed reality in AEC, like that's an incredible niche already. So I guess my advice would be, yeah, work out what the kind of the core value proposition is from day one, and build with users in mind, and maybe start with an application that solves a problem that you yourself have. I think that's what we did, and it's sort of the best advice for someone that's working within a massive niche, which I think MR and AAC at the moment is. So pick your user as well. Architecture, engineering, and construction. Like, holy crap, there's a lot of potential kind of users in there, and user sort of personas and use cases. And I would say, maybe if you're going to do a mixed reality startup in AEC, I would say, ooh, maybe you want to do a mixed reality startup specifically for visualizing interior wall layout, or maybe you want to do an AEC startup specifically for real-time rendering using of extremely large BIM models, or maybe it's for engineers, or maybe you want to do an AEC startup specifically for sequencing on large airport projects, you know, where you're using mixed reality to view that. You know, I think the breadth of those industries is just enormous, and focus is essential if you want to make any sort of impact, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. I would like to wrap up the interview with few light questions and a rapid fire round. I hope the internet doesn't create that lag, but so you will have like 10 seconds to answer the question. So it should be very quick, whatever you think that comes first to your mind. So my first question is, which city is in your travel bucket list?
We've been to Pluderhausen in Germany, so I sort of feel we've nearly ticked off every bizarre location work could take us to. But look, I'd love to eat some caviar in St. Petersburg. We're close to the border. We haven't made it across the border into Russia yet. So I'd love to go spend some time there.
Yeah, we just had a client in Portugal sign up recently. I'd love to go to Lisbon. I think that'd be, or Porto, it'd be great.
I see. Your favorite book, or a book which made a big impact in your life?
We read lots of sci-fi, or I do. But I think in terms of a big impact in my life, Philosophy and Simulation, Manuel de Landa. Everyone that's interested in computational design needs to read that book.
Mhm.
Definitely just, I'd say, favorite, not necessarily impactful. Read when I was quite young, a book by James Clavell called Shogun, set in sort of like 16th century Japan. And yeah, just a super interesting sort of look into like a culture that, you know, different than my own sort of thing. So yeah, fun book.
See, what are your hobbies?
I an ever-changing list of hobbies. At the moment, I like learning new things, and so at the moment, I'm actually in a location learning to do some. I've started fly fishing, so that's a sort of interesting excuse to be able to just physically get out in the nice nature in the rivers and waterways. I don't have much luck catching anything, but it's nice scenery, so I'm having fun with that at the moment.
Interesting.
Gwyl's got no hobbies.
I really have very few hobbies. I mean, I used to like making music. I think that's I wish I had more time for that. Surfing, yeah, anything that doesn't involve sitting at a computer.
Do you play any instrument, or you?
Yeah, try and play just about everything. I grew up learning piano, played a lot of guitar in bands. I'm a terrible singer. Play some drums, do a lot of production. I like synthesizers. Yeah, it's all good.
It's awesome. My last question is you would like to share which we didn't cover in this interview?
Sorry, that was cut off for me.
Seems like the
Hello?
net's cut off right at the end. Sorry.
Sorry for that. I'll repeat my question. Like, is there anything else which we didn't cover in this interview, which you'd like to share?
Look, I guess an easily shameless plug. If any of your viewers are like students or anyone wanting to play around with AR, we've got a feature-rich free version of Fologram for mobile, which you can get off our website. So if you're a Rhino user, you can and you've got a compatible phone, you can start playing around with and start building some fun little AR applications and see what it's all about.
And also, if you are doing any sort of construction and fabrication, go check out TwinBuild. Twinbuild.com is a new product that we've just released a couple of months ago, which is I think one of the most precise AR applications currently available on the market. So we've managed to get the HoloLens precision down to about an eighth of an inch, which is really, really exciting. So if you're not aware of that, go check it out.
That's incredible. Thanks a lot, guys, for your time to do this. It was very insightful and inspiring. I apologize for the bad internet, but like it was a great interview. I had a great time. Thank you, and good luck with the next phase of Fologram.
Fantastic.
Thanks
for your time. Enjoyed
me.
ourselves.
Yeah.
See you.
Have a nice rest of your day. Bye-bye.
You too. Ciao. Bye.